So I guess this is like the part where people do like a cliche YouTube intro. I don't really do that shit. So we're going to go off the cuff. I'm Arshay. I'm a VTuber. This channel is all dedicated around helping people bring something to the table. I'm a heavy role player myself, mostly as a dungeon master. I've been DMing for a couple years now, and for some of you, that really isn't shit. Like, I know people out there who've been DMing for 10 years, but I feel like what I have been doing and my experience is pretty helpful. I mean, some insight for these games that are highly roleplay invested, because I've been doing them for a long time now, and I've been running a lot of games, mostly on Discord. I've met a lot of people. I've had like, I want to say over 50 people now in my games. A lot of them I just ran through because, you know, not everybody works out. Like, let's be honest, not everybody's going to fit in your style of game. We got a lot of people with a lot of different tastes, and that's cool. I mean, everybody's got their own thing, and this is a game where there is no right and wrong as long as everybody's having fun. But as a DM, you know, you need to make sure that people are invested in your games because you're investing a ton of your time into them. You want to make sure people are appreciating that. Value your time. With that being said, today I'm making a video all around, you know, making intriguing characters, making characters that are going to pull people into the game, bring them back every week, and be invested in your story, your plot. I felt like we should start off with some simple shit. Common mistakes, common errors, or at least things that I see when it comes to playing the game. When I've been running the game now for almost 3 years, and I've noticed this a lot, at least in Discord and even with running games in person for friends and family. One thing that I notice right off the bat with new players is insert themselves into a fantasy role, insert themselves into your fantasy setting. And that's cool. Like, you could totally do that. It's not like a bad thing to take things from your personal side, your stance, and apply them to your character. Everybody's got flaws, everybody's got quirks, and it's obvious you don't want to play a character that's not going to fit with your personality. What I'm talking about is somebody who's just literally playing themselves. And if you're with like a group of friends that know you very well, they're going to know every action you're going to make, and it's just not appealing. It's not interesting. It's not going to do that thing that we want, which is get people invested in your character. Of course you're invested in your character. I mean, I hope you're invested in your character. Why wouldn't you be? We need to get everybody else invested. We need your DM to be invested. We need the other players to be invested. And playing yourself, it's just not that interesting. I don't know. I've seen it 1,000 times, and it's something that I've always noticed new players going back on. It's harder to notice when you're like playing online and you don't really know somebody that well, but you hang out with them for a little bit and you figure out their personality, and you're just like, oh wait, that character that they're playing in my game is just them. They're that character. I'm not saying like you need to play a polar opposite of yourself in the character. That's also difficult too. Just find things that really work with you, that work with your personality, but make sure you are playing a character. Don't just play yourself, because it's lazy. It's just really lazy. Another thing I notice with new players, and this is even with veteran players or like players that have been playing for a little while, is they're making an existing character that's in media. I had a guy one time come up to me and he's like, I'm gonna play an armored artificer, and I'm basically just gonna be Iron Man. Like, he's got a chest laser. This dude, I'll just give the flying spell and we'll say they're like jet boots, and he's just Iron Man. I'm playing Tony Stark. I was like, yeah, sure, let's go with it. Why not? You know, fuck it, Iron Man's in my games now. Tony Stark's in my games. I don't even remember the name of the character. Long story short, it was the same thing as playing like a character that is just yourself. It's not interesting. Everybody knows what you're going to play as, and if you're trying to play that character to a T, and like you have like another like Marvel fanboy who loves Tony Stark, or if you're playing like a Han Solo or a Luke Skywalker-esque character and you have another like Star Wars fan on the table, they'll call your shit out. They'll be like, you're not playing that character like you should be playing that character. And who cares? Like, you shouldn't have people telling you how you should be playing that character in the first place. So a good thing to do if like you really want to like base your character around some character that you really admire, make it new, make it fresh, use it as a basis, but apply your own twist on it, give your own personality to it. I just find it, again, it's just lazy. You should be making a new character, and there are new ideas. That's definitely not what I'm saying. You don't have to be like some crazy creative writer when it comes to these characters, but don't just copy and paste something that's already out there. You can definitely steal shit, don't get me wrong. You can take ideas from other sources of media and flip them and reflavor them, give them a new skin and just try to make it your own. Some people might catch on. Like I use a wizard in my games. His name's Arantel. I couldn't tell you how many times in Discord somebody's telling me like, yo, Arantel? Like, isn't that the city in that one anime, Overlord? And I'll be like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I just like the name. I'm not like the biggest fan of Overlord, but I like the name. It was a cool sounding name, so I gave it to a wizard. Some people will catch on. Like, it's okay. If your players don't catch on, you don't have to be like, oh yeah, I put hours and hours of mental thinking into making all of these names. Some people might say that's a cop-out. Who cares? We're trying to make games smooth and easy, and I'm a lazy-ass DM. I'm not trying to spend forever on just like names and random shit for NPCs and cities and stuff. I want to focus on the plot. I want to make sure I'm making the things that are really going to drive people to come back to my table. You should be doing the same thing with your characters. If you found inspiration, then use it, but don't copy and paste. It's just boring. It's just too lazy. I remember one of my friends who was getting into D&D with me at the time, and this was like one of my first games I was running. He just wanted to play Batman. I decided like, you know, Batman's not really a good fit for my game, so he used it in another friend of ours, his game, and this game was a Eberron setting. He basically was just Eberron Batman. He even found like a steampunk Batman and played that as his like token. I remember that character was just so abrasive. Whenever we tried to get into any like situation with another NPC, instead of like asking questions or prodding conversation, he just, well, he used his hands before his words. I remember the DM having to basically give us plot armor because that character threw the whole plot out of whack, just derailed the game, which is not a terrible idea. Like, characters that derail the expectations of the DM are always fun. DM shouldn't like put you on rails to begin with, but if it's really fucking up the groove of the party and the plot coming forward, then it's not a good thing. And having a character that's like super abrasive, the loner archetype, who's just gonna, like I said, use their hands before their charisma, it's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be an issue, gonna be annoying for everybody else, and we don't want to like have people running away from the table. Like I said, we're trying to bring them in, baby. I don't know, the Batman archetype is just one of those that I see over and over again. The loner rogue who's just in it for themselves and refuses to be cooperative. What is the point of playing a character that's uncooperative in this team-based game? You know, this is a game where you're going to be playing hopefully with a couple other people in your party, and I hope the DM encourages teamwork. Yeah, I mean, there's other archetypes too that I've seen, like a self-loathing character that is just in it for themselves, where they will always put the party beneath them, steal the gold for themselves, take all the loot, don't tell the rest of the party what's going on. And the players, of course, know. Like, you can't hide that fact. Like, oh yeah, so-and-so just took everything for themselves, but I have to role play now that I don't know that my character has no idea, and I just have to pretend that I'm cool with that shit. When in actuality, I'm a little frustrated because I wanted a little bit of that loot too. I've been in situations, and in the beginning, man, I used to be like, oh yeah, that conflict is good role play. But if everybody's okay with it, if you have a group of people that's just like, no, I think that shit just sucks, like, that's not fun for me at all. Like, I want a little bit of loot too. We were in that dungeon for 4 sessions, and you find so-and-so keeping it all for themselves. That can be super frustrating for everybody if you're not at the right table. Mind yourself. Make sure you're making a character that's cooperative and a team player. If you want to play an evil character or a character that's gonna pull one over everybody else, then make sure it's okay with everyone. Make sure you bring that up in the session 0. Make sure that the DM is okay with it and the other players are cool with it too, because it doesn't work all the time. Trust me, I know from experience. Another thing I've noticed or been asked, I get hate for this shit all the time from players, is when they have an idea that they really want to put on the table, a character that they've been stewing on for a long time but haven't been able to use it yet. You need to make sure that you're making a character that is suited for the campaign setting, that is suited for what the DM is bringing. You shouldn't be forcing the DM to fit and wedge their game into the bubble that is the character that you want to play. For example, I was running a game in the Exandria setting, the setting of Critical Role, and I had a player who really wanted to play somebody who was from our world, Earth. They wanted to play a cheerleader that died and was reborn in our world. They basically wanted to be isekai'd. It just wasn't the game I was trying to run. They wanted to use this character who was, like I said, isekai'd. The idea of they died in our world, Earth, and then get reborn in a fantasy setting. And this isekai character was just a snobby valley girl cheerleader. It was super annoying. They were like, can I have a cell phone? But the cell phone doesn't have to exist, and I just want to be a valley girl. It just doesn't work all the time, right? Like, you shouldn't go into a game with a character already in mind that you've been stewing on for like a couple months. You should be talking to everybody at the table, not just the DM, but the players, and see what everybody's trying to work with. Make sure it fits in that setting. If you got a character that's supposed to be from the Underdark, everybody's playing Drow because the DM is trying to run an Underdark game, then don't be like, oh, well, that kind of sucks because I wanted to play this like warlock fairy from the Feywilds and they were a circus performer. I don't really understand how it's gonna fit, but you know, you can make it work, right, DM? That shit sucks. Don't do that. Don't think that your DM is obligated to put way more effort into just your character than anybody else's. You need to be a little respectful and work with them. And if you're not like feeling it, then maybe that's just not the group for you. There's hundreds and hundreds of people out there playing D&D, running their own games, and you can always try and find a game that's gonna, you know, work with you that way, but you shouldn't expect your DM to like bend over backwards just for your one character. Make sure that it fits in their world. It's gonna work in their setting. Another thing I really despise, something that I tell my players often in my session zeros, often in the games that I'm about to run, I don't want to see insufferable characters. I want to make sure that everyone is going to be working well within the party, and I want to make sure that I'm getting characters that are going to make cool roleplay moments for everybody, and something that everyone will enjoy. That character that just sits in the corner under the shadows and peers through their cowl. He glares at you. He doesn't say a word. Well, I go up, I ask him his name. He doesn't respond. That character sucks. Could sound really cool. You could come in with all the descriptions and paint a picture on what your character is doing physically. You know, this is an interactive game. Please interact with people. Maybe you have a shy character, and this kind of ties into the same thing. Shy characters can work if you play them right. A good example, if you haven't seen it, or if you have, Critical Role Season 2, Caleb Widowgast. He's kind of a shy character at first. He doesn't open up to many people about his personal life or what he's going through. It works because he has another character to open up to. He has ties into another character's background. They have a friendship, a bond, and through that bond, they connect on a lot of things, and he can be shy with other players, but open up for that said player. So it works. It's a good dynamic. But don't just be somebody who shuts everybody out. Don't be the shy shut-in. Don't be the insufferable loner archetype, because that shit sucks. That's also boring. I don't care how much you put a spin on it, and you could get a couple laughs or a couple like, ooh, that's cools. But at the end of the day, this is a game where you're interacting with other people, so make a character that's gonna do that. Now, this is something that I think it doesn't really apply to a lot of games out there, but for my games, and I feel like more games that are starting nowadays kind of feel the same sentiment. I see a lot of videos and read a lot of forums about this shit too. Don't worry about alignment. Alignment is, to me, so vague. It's just so broad. What is true evil? What is true good? What is even true chaotic behavior? We all know universal evils. We all know universal goods, but what is like good and evil can be different for each person to person, each character, NPC. We know, like I said, those universal evils. We're not going to argue that there aren't psychotic murderers out there that are beyond becoming good. We can't like sit here and pretend that there aren't sometimes necessary evils. Would you deem the orphan child out on the streets robbing local bakeries for food to feed their sibling who is sick and dying. Would you consider that an evil? I don't know, it depends on who you are, right? It's one of those things that I just find way too difficult to pinpoint a character in a certain alignment, especially chaotic. I don't really see anybody running chaotic how at least I would deem it. I know some people think it's someone that's not conforming, someone who's acting on their own self-interest. When it comes down to that stuff, they kind of teeter more to evil. I've also found a lot of people who say things like, yeah, I'm only in it for myself. That's kind of like your own morals, right? So you can even say that it's a lawful character, but that comes down to like, oh, are we gonna sit here and argue what alignment is? Because that's why I don't think it really fucking matters. People are just gonna sit here and have their own reasons and argue for their own reasons. I don't know, it's just so broad, so vague, and if you sit there and worry about it too long, it'll really like drive a hole into your brain, and your character shouldn't be staying in the same alignment anyways. You're gonna be hopefully playing this game for a couple months, a year, or a couple years maybe. You don't think that character is going to change throughout all those experiences, all those sessions and combats and role play scenarios and internal conflicts with themselves? They're not going to change one bit, 1 ounce. If that's true, it's extremely boring. I find that a little lame, and that's why I tell my characters, my players, when they're making their characters, don't give a shit about alignment. Like, who cares? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the aspect of like real life, because shit is not black and white. It's all gray. Nothing's black and white in the real world. So I don't really make my games around that, and I find that just more interesting. But I know that there's DMs out there, there's games going on out there that really do care about that stuff, really care about alignment. So that's why I'm saying, like, hey, take what I'm saying, everything that I'm saying in the video, with a grain of salt. You don't have to apply this shit to any of your characters. This is just one space goblin's opinion. You don't have to listen to her one bit. With all that being said though, those are just some mistakes, some minor mistakes I see. What we really should be focusing on is the qualities that we want to deem good, the qualities that we think will be successful in making a character that will, like I've been saying over and over again, pull people back into the game, be invested in your character and their plot. There's a lot, honestly, a lot more than it comes down to flaws. This is what helps me get my players to really think hard about what's going on in their character's mind and really getting into that character when it comes to playing in the game, because we don't want like very generic characters. We don't want generic PCs. We want something that's gonna really blow people out of the water. And one of those things I find, at least when I'm making a base character or getting my players to make a base character, is a gimmick. It can sound like a little cliche. Everybody knows, like, oh yeah, gimmick, like I'm the lazy bum, or I'm the fucking Hercule jock Chad character. But that's really not what I mean. What I mean by a gimmick is like a sentence, like one sentence that describes your character. And a lot of gimmicks that I think of when I'm talking to my players isn't like that simple. Like, you could go for a prodigy-esque archetype where you're born into nobility. You're really high up on the food chain, and your family expects something out of you. They expect you to be a pawn when it comes to their political gain, and they don't really care about who you are as a person. They don't care about your growth as a human being. All they want is you to be their pawn in their game that is political power. Because of that, you have found the urge to throw that all away, cast it all aside, get rid of that nobility, that prodigy that they wanted you to be, and be your own person. That's why you're adventuring. That's why you found this band of heroes that you're calling your friends, your party members. You were setting out a task to find your identity and cast aside that name that has bound you to an existence of, well, loneliness. Or maybe you go for the veteran archetype, where this is your last task, your last adventure. You're old and tired, but you need to do this because it's for a great cause. It's for the city that you were born in, the family that you wish to protect, your loved ones, you know, your significant other, your children. You want to protect that modest lifestyle that you made for yourself. And because of that, you'll do whatever it means. And that means I have to go out and stop this like weird crime syndicate that's just drilled its fingers deep in the underbelly of my city. I can't have it. I can't have it whatsoever. Or you could be that nobody, that person who was struck by poverty, has had nothing to their name for their entire life, has been living in filth and squalor amongst the people in the streets. And one day you found yourself cold and you were rubbing your hands. Embers and flames emitted from your fingers. Turns out you yourself are bound to the weave that is magic, and you are now a sorcerer. Something in your bloodline has given you this ability, and you're going to use it to your advantage, and you're going to take those street smart skills that you had to apply to surviving and now take it to adventuring, gain that fame and notoriety that you never had. Now, these are gimmicks that I find super interesting, things that are really gonna make your character stand out. And again, you could just say this shit all in one sentence, wrap it up. I'm a veteran hero. This is my last task to save my city from the thieves syndicate that has been brewing in the underbelly market. I'm the prodigy of a noble family high up in the political sphere, but they don't respect me, and I'm here to get my respect, not from them, but other people. I'm the nobody who grew up poor and didn't know when my next meal would arrive, but one day magic emitted from my grasps, and now I'm gonna make a name for myself. Another thing that I find super important, and you've probably heard 100 times over if you've been paying attention to like any videos or online guides about how to make a great D&D character or a decent character in general, is conflict, whether that be internal or external. I think like a good example for me is I've had many players come to me who didn't really have conflicts at first. They had a character in mind, they had a personality, they had a background, but they didn't have conflicts. And as a DM, I really had to throw some at them. I have two characters in mind, at least in my current game, that I think about when it comes to conflicts. That is external and external. One of them, my player's character, called Hercule Beatus. He's a large humanoid beetle, and he comes from the Underdark. How his background works is he was in this hive mind, and one day he saved a girl named Salem, another player character, who was diving deep into the Underdark for her family, who was a cult, long story short. While she was down there, she was being assaulted by other beetles, other beetle humanoids, insectoids, that were basically going to take her life. But something snapped in Hercule. This tiny beetle who was much smaller than his family, his kin, he raged for the first time. He raged and he felt the urge to defend her. The first thought that ever ran through his mind was, I have to protect this person. And through his strength, he defended her and flew her out of the Underdark. He struggled to communicate with her at a time, but eventually they figured out language, and that internal conflict of, I had to betray my family, I had to betray my purpose, throw out everything just for this person in this instance, is always stuck with him. But now that's an external conflict as well. That mind control, that hive mind of his, the brood mothers, the maggot beings that have taken over his mind, at least when he was in the Underdark, they keep pulling back, trying to bring him back to the Underdark, bring him back to the hive. And it comes up every session and every once in a while where he goes blank. And it's even recently started to take a big take on his mental fortitude. He is beginning to outlash at his companions. He's not remembering things. He's scared. He's really scared. And watching him roleplay that out where he has no idea what's going to happen next, and he tells his companions, you have to do what you have to do. If I go wild, I can't control myself sometimes, and I need help, but I don't know if I'll get it in time. That's some great conflict. A good thing to do is set your DM up with some things in your background that can make conflicts like that. Another character in my games that I find super intriguing in the way that they didn't have much of a conflict, internal or external, in the beginning of our games is Whimsy Morningbloom, a kitsune that has derived from nobility, a noble family that has founded an island for kitsune after a continent was destroyed between two gods, one being hurled into the continent and that continent becoming an archipelago of multiple islands. One of those islands was founded by Whimsy's great-grandfather and named Tatia. The family was not only valued because of the fact that they founded this island, the safe haven for the kitsune, but because they possessed a strange oddity in their lineage where the firstborn would get augury-esque powers, the ability to have these dreams that could predict the future or warn people of a future to come. She soon realized that she was born with these powers, but the problem was that she wasn't firstborn. In actuality, she was a middle child and had two elder twins as siblings, an older brother and an older sister. She soon learned that those siblings were bastard children and not descending from her father, who had this augury power like her. Because of that, her father wasn't very accepting. He didn't believe her. He casted her aside, and she decided to venture off, like her older sister, into the mainland. Through adventuring with her party, she found some ruins, and these ruins were drawing her in closer. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but soon realized that this must have been a manifested destiny, because her ancestor, her great-grandmother, the mother of her grandfather who founded Tatia, reached out to her, a spirit that's been bound to the material plane because of a ritual that was made by an ex-lover. This loved one, this great-grandmother of Whimsy's, named Satsuki, she was pleading for help. She wanted to pass on, but there was only one way to do it. Find the people that were also bound to her soul, also bound to the material plane, that were used as spell components to form her a new body. It was a dark ritual. High-leveled adventurers paid the price for it. It's up to Whimsy to go out, find those fractured souls that came back as these undead beings known as Hollowed, or the Hollowed Ones, convince them, or maybe even take their lives as a sacrifice to bring her grandmother to peace. Otherwise, if she doesn't do so in the allotted amount of time that her grandmother predicts, then there's no helping her. Satsuki will be stuck there for the end of time. That's an external conflict on top of her internal conflict that we came up with, I want to say like 6 or 7 sessions into the game. It's hard at first to come up with those conflicts, those things that are going to really make our characters stand out, but we've made it work. I bet if you really are struggling, talk to your DM. I can't imagine them not coming up with something that will really fit with their world, and sometimes it just gives them a chance to tie you into the main plot, which is always a good thing. Maybe, you know, like I brought up earlier with Hercule, tie your background into another player character. Salem, the woman that he saved from the Underdark, that's her background too. She decided to run away from her family, a cult of Loath that told her that she needed to venture into the Underdark with no goals in mind, in hopes to find an answer, find something that will tie her to Loath, because they were trying to breed champions for Loath. They thought that maybe, you know, just throwing kids into the Underdark was the answer. Combining those two stories made a friendship, but there was also internal conflict between those two, and I won't really get into it, maybe in another video. Those things that I mentioned really made those characters stand out. They're memorable to me, they're memorable to the players, and it's really got them invested in the game and each other. So really think hard about those conflicts, and you don't really need them all there at first. Maybe you're trying to figure out where this game is going and those conflicts come up later. You don't have to show everything about your character at first, not in the first couple sessions. Do real people open up to strangers right away? I don't. Maybe you do. Maybe you're an open person, and that's cool. But I just feel like in the means of reality that most people aren't that open. I don't think your character would be that either. So it's okay to come up with a conflict, an internal conflict later, and an external conflict might not come up for a long time. The Whimsy stuff, actually, that whole Satsuki bit, I want to say that didn't come up till like session 10, session 11 or so. Another thing that I've noticed in making characters that really makes a good character, and for veteran players, again, this might be something that you've heard 1,000 times. It's a no-brainer, but I still feel like I could put a little spice into this, help people out and give them something a little fresh. Wants and goals. What does your character strive for? What are they aiming for? What are they trying to achieve? Something that they're planning for, but inevitably plans change. Never expect success. Always strive for it. Something that I've really been trying to put towards my characters and towards players in my games, because it's true. In real life, we aim for a lot of things. We try to be successful in a lot of branches. It doesn't work out all the time. Plans change. You can't predict the future. You can't expect success, but you should always strive for it. You should always try to better yourself. And I think that goes with with characters too. If we want to make a character that's bound in reality, that feels real and not just some like random ass archetype, then we kind of have to apply this to them too. I think a good exercise is a to-do list. Make a couple really big goals like, oh, I want to be an asserted noble. I want to have a lot of political power. But also throw in some simple shit. Maybe as simple as like, I'm just going to buy a new pair of fucking shoes every time we travel because I like shoes. It doesn't have to be super complicated. I had a character who I played. She was a ex-slave. She was in the gladiatorial pits and she fought for her freedom. She paid every single ounce of her wages to get her freedom. And once she was free, she just wanted to do mundane shit. She wanted to relax on her porch. She wanted to bask in the sun. She wanted to be lazy as fuck because for most of her life, she wasn't allowed to, where she just wanted to be a normal person. Unfortunately, life wasn't letting her. Stuff like that, like getting some simple wants and goals out on a list, writing down things that you can really look back to and having that to look at when really pops in the question, like, what would my character want to do? Think of a couple reasons that your character is sticking around. You should have goals that make your character stick with the party. Why are they invested with this group, going on life and death journeys with these said strangers? Something I do, if not every time when it comes to making a character, and something I try to get my players to do when they're making theirs, is giving them a visual identity. You might be asking, well, Arshay, doesn't every character have a visual identity? And that's true, but I'm really talking about something that is unique to them. Think of Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? Azula. She's got blue flames. It's not anything crazy, but every time you see blue fire in the show, you know who the fuck is showing up. It's kind of memorable. There's not really a reason why she's got blue flames, she just does. That could be the same for your character. It doesn't have to just be like a change of color or a change of damage type, as simple as changing the shape. I think I played with somebody who used Eldritch Blast, and instead of just some green ball of force damage, they did a flying flaming fist that came out of their hand. They would hurl it by throwing fists. It's nothing special, didn't change how the spell worked, but it was unique. Another thing you could do is reflavor existing races. I do this all the time. Someone who hops in my Discord and tries to play my games, they'll be like, yo, Arshay, what the hell? You have so many fucking homebrew races. How do you have the time to make all these? And I tell them, I don't really at all. It's just reflavoring of an existing race that's in the source books. Another thing too is just having your characters do mundane activities. I brought her up earlier, my Theros character, Odessa. One thing that she did often in the games is whenever there was a long rest, short rest, or free time, she would paint, or she bust out a big cube of chalk and just start drawing whatever she could. She wasn't good at it, she wasn't great at performance, and she had a terrible sleight of hand skill, but for a big brute, she loved it, and she'd do it whenever, and that was super unique to her character. Another character that I had in a game way back when was this goblin girl who had no tongue, so she couldn't really talk. To get around that, I would just role play that she was communicating through literature. Through the session, I would describe how her penmanship would get really messy, her hands would start to cramp, that slowly but surely her whole body would just be covered in ink because she was always writing this in parchment, ink, and quill. At first it was really subtle, like you see blotches of ink on her hands, and then eventually her fingertips were just covered. There'd be ink all over her face and her clothes. Depending on how important the session was or how many times she needed to talk, I would just get into a lot of detail on how messy she was getting and how beat up her hands were. Eventually, sometimes she just wouldn't even try to write anything because she'd be so tired, and she'd just try and signal things with her body language. Things like that could really make your character identity stand out. I think it's something people just don't do very often. They don't really come up with these unique features. They just go with the same old, and there's nothing wrong with that either, but change it up. It can be really simple. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to be too creative. Like I said, anything from changing the color of the magic or changing the shape of the magic could really make your character stand out. Oh, and another thing too, like if you're not even a spellcaster, describe your maneuvers. Describe how you're fighting these creatures, please. So many people that play these martial classes just roll the dice. I hit it. Roll the dice. I hit it. Sit there. It takes like 30 seconds, probably even less, to describe how you're hitting this creature. Swoop for its calf muscle and then clip it in the leg. Chin checked it. Chopped it in the jugular. Simple shit. I'm not much of a martial player but I feel like you get the gist. You hear it over and over again. You watch all these videos, you read all these forums, all these guides, even the people you play with will tell you the same thing. You should give your character a flaw. Well, yeah, that's true. Give your character flaws, but I feel like some people just don't put enough thought into it. The good flaws, the great flaws in a character that always stick to me are the ones that are clashing with moral values. But like, don't clash with the game, of course. You don't want any of your characters to clash with what's going on within the game. The better flaws are the clashing morals, the lies that we strongly agree with, you know, the lies that we tell ourselves on a daily basis because we don't want to accept the truth, maybe, or we just are blind to it. I have a lot of examples when it comes to clashing morals. A good one is if you're playing like a cleric or a paladin that is following some type of deity, having blind faith. Gods, I feel like, should be fucking up as much as people. If you think about it, they've created you in an image that they thought was best for you in the setting of D&D, of course. Or maybe they even made you in the image of themselves. And if that's true, then they should have as many flaws as people do. So having blind faith in a deity is probably not the best idea, but we see it all the time in fictional faith. There are tons of examples of that going wrong. Some DMs out there will definitely mess with those players that just have blind faith in their god. I know I have. It's super fun to flip the script on a character that just thought that this deity was supposed to be a certain type of alignment. Like I said earlier, I don't play by the alignment rules, and neither do my NPCs. Another idea that comes to mind, those above me always know best. Your rulers, your political leaders, or even your tutors, your instructors. Again, it goes down to that blind faith, but not with a deity this time, but with people. A flaw that could get somebody in a whole mess of trouble, and if not them, maybe somebody else. An example I could give that I've used in my games that I kind of based on real events is a political leader that says that they speak with a god and they demand that people listen and hear them out. People do listen and people do follow what they say, and it can get people killed. A religious cult of some sort that follows this person who claims to speak to the deity. They say that the deity instructs them to take land that has been promised to them. There are a group of people that live there and have been living there, an indigenous people. They don't care because their deity said it's theirs, so they go and take it by force, and that indigenous people almost get wiped out and they're ripped from their land. Later in life, say your character was one of these people who followed this leader, this religious leader. Turns out they were lying through their teeth. They never spoke to any deity. They just wanted that land to have prosperous farmland, right? Or some type of financial gain, more power for them. And it's regrettable. Things like that I really find great when it comes to morally gray flaws that will clash with morals later in your characters' lives. A good example of me making my players clash morals was they were on a boat that was traveling to a Arctic island. It was 7 days of travel on sea. As they were traveling, they came across a harpy floating in the water. They took her out of the water, didn't understand where she came from. They were nowhere near land. They were puzzled. This harpy began to mimic their voices, and they figured out a way to communicate. She was a young girl who was starving and she was shackled. They soon realized that these shackles were branded. Soon enough, a ship shows up, a pirate ship, and they claimed that they were missing property, and that property was on their boat because those shackles were enchanted with some type of magic that could track the harpy. They knew what was going on. They knew who they were talking about. They didn't have to explain that the harpy was that property, and the players said, no, we're not going to give her back to you. They didn't even think about it. Some of them did, but others didn't. It was no hesitation. We're not going to give you a person. By doing that, they risked the lives of all the sailors on their ship. They didn't even consult the captain. They weren't the captain of the ship. They just went with it. A couple characters were conflicted on this. Like, was this girl, which some of them considered a monster because harpies had attacked them before, was this girl worth saving compared to the 40 men and women that were on that ship at the time? The group just agreed that it's not worth it, that they're not going to let her live a life of squalor. They're going to save her. And they did, and luckily they only lost 2 people in the scuffle immediately destroyed that ship. If you really want to make that edgy character, maybe they're an orphan and they've only had their own backs. No one has ever helped them. It's deep down they feel that they don't deserve anybody. They don't deserve or are worthy of anyone. Because of that, they are quick to cast people aside, and eventually they can learn to find that love and friendship through their companions. And a big one, oh man, this one's good. I see it, sometimes it's used wrong. A lot of people in my games have used it wrong, but when they use it right, it can be really good. And that's the ends justify the means. What are you willing to do what you think is right? Over and over again, my current group of players in my campaign are clashing with each other. An example I could bring up is there was an NPC who was brutally wounded, and there was no way of saving them because the wounds were uncurable from magic. There wasn't even a chance they could get them to their home and their family before they would die in the marsh that they were traveling in. So one of the characters said, because there is no way we can help them, maybe we should rest here in this abandoned tower and give them their last night with some ease. We shouldn't be tracking through the marsh with them bleeding out. The other player said we should at least try to get them home. They could be wrong. We could get them there in time. That clash of morals, you know, that clash of, no, we have to get in this tower because there's something big and important here. We shouldn't just abandon it. This is a time-sensitive event. But the others wanting to save that NPC got in the way of that. That person who was trying to get in the tower was willing to sacrifice the chance of getting the NPC to their loved ones before they died. Just a chance. And that's why they thought it was necessary. We get into this tower, we get a set item that could save hundreds, maybe thousands of people's lives, and we do that in the sacrifice of this person who is dead no matter what. There's nothing we can do to save them. But to the other players, it wasn't worth it. They're not trying to turn their backs on that person, that NPC that helped them through that journey. But when I mean justified, the justification comes from that character. It's the character's point of view. I feel like I should have said this in the beginning, but I didn't. These are not in like a particular order, best to worst, because this last one isn't really necessary, but I feel like people slack on it all the time. It's something I notice with new people that come to my server and play in my games. Please build a character that's fun to roleplay inside of combat as much as they are outside of combat. Nothing is more bland or less flavorful than a character that just goes mute as soon as combat starts. We'll just go back to the martial class, right? I roll 18, hit, 17, hit, 13, miss. That's my turn. Nothing, right? Like it's bland, and every time you get to them, you're not gonna be like, oh yeah, so-and-so was so distinctive. They could be the top damaging character in the group, but because they don't describe what's going on in combat, it's not memorable. I've had people that don't do anything really in combat other than just describe maneuvers. I had a player who played a flying pig, a bay fawn, didn't do much in combat whatsoever. He was a glorified healer. Even though he wasn't like doing any damage, he did his best to describe all the funny, goofy ass shit that pig would do in the middle of combat. Trotting around the field with barely any movement speed, trying to lift his big fat pig ass up with his tiny little bird wings. It was funny. It wasn't like he was an MVP when it came to combat, but it was memorable, very memorable. Tiny stuff like that, it doesn't have to be super big, it doesn't have to be super flavorful, will make your character stand out, and it's way better than just being silent for the entire combat. Well, that's pretty much all I got for y'all today. I hope that this video was helpful and applicable for you at the table. If you feel that I missed anything, then tell me down below. Maybe there's something I just could have added more to the conversation, or you just want to tell me that I'm an asshat and I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Next video I think will be mostly for our DMs out there, how we should be more lenient and accepting of our players making their characters. We don't have to be 100% with it when it comes to character creation, but we should encourage people's creativity. We shouldn't force them into a box. I don't encourage people to be the DM that just says, you only can play humans and elves and gnomes, dwarves, halflings. no dragonborn, no tieflings, and God forbid, no warforge. It's just lame, it's bland, and I think I'll be mentioning a couple reflavored races, how we can make it all work in your world and your setting, and just talk about how we really should be boosting up that creativity, because that's what's going to get our players to keep coming to our games and be encouraged to stick with those characters that they're playing, and making sure that people are invested in our story so we're having fun too. With all that shit out of the way, I am super glad that I got to bring this video to you. It was a long process in the making. The models took some time. I had to learn some art skills for myself. But yeah, I really enjoyed myself, and I hope you did too. I hope this was somewhat entertaining. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you next time.